this segment, I'll provide an overview of research grants and the general application process. Very little, if any, scientific research can be conducted without funding, and most of that funding comes from research grants. Here we'll look at some of the criteria you need to think about when applying for a grant and what reviewers will look for when reading your application. There are some preliminary considerations when you're getting ready to sit down and figure out how to apply for a grant. First, can you prove to the funding agency that you have adequate training, knowledge, and expertise to successfully carry out a research project? Do you have time to design and carry out the needed experiments? Do you have the expertise to analyze data? Is there a suitable work environment? What evidence can you offer that your research is worth supporting? And finally, do you have a job, or at least a job offer, that will give you access to research facilities and support personnel? If you can't tick off all the boxes, all is not lost. You may be able to apply for a research grant by partnering with a mentor or a senior colleague who has the necessary experience and perhaps previous grants. You can also start by applying for smaller grants. Many universities and organizations emphasizing research have what are called seed grants to help younger investigators get started in their research careers. So, for the sake of example, let's suppose you're ready to proceed. We're going to address where do you start with your project? What needs to be in place? How do you write a grant application? And how do you know when you're ready to submit it? We'll review each of these questions in turn. Well, you start with a research question. And how do you decide what your research question should be? The most important consideration is that it be something that's interesting to you. It's the same concept as for this class. If you're not interested in what you're writing about, you're not going to make it interesting to anyone else. Your mentors may suggest it, but if you're not really passionate about it, you're not going to do well. Is it interesting to the general public and to the study population? Is it, for instance, ready for primetime or CNN? Fundable ideas are practical and will accomplish something useful, so you need to be able to answer the so what or why should we care question persuasively. Maybe you want to determine how useful a certain method is for solving a problem. Maybe you're looking for a link between a cause and an effect. But the main goal here is to make your readers see the value in what you're proposing to do. Your question should have research potential, such as an understudied problem or condition. Generally, enough groundwork has been laid by the previous researchers, so you'll have some idea of where to go next. And this would involve building on a theme from past work, reviewing scientific literature, and demonstrating that you have the knowledge and expertise to conduct the research. Earlier in this course, we discussed credibility. Your task is to establish your credibility and show the reviewers that you have a command of your field. So, you want to ask yourself a few questions about your research question. How will I conduct my research? Will my experimental design lead where I want to go? Just for example, let's suppose you want to collect data on diabetes among children and adolescents in Native American tribes. How can you ensure that the parents will bring their children for follow-up so you can get the data you need? Can I measure what I want to measure? Continuing our example, there may not be very many, or indeed any, youth-oriented diabetes trials, so you'll need to find enough groups of people to create an adequate sample size, and they may be in different places. Is it feasible to do what I propose to do from where I am? Will they come to you? Do you need to go to them? For how long and how often? How much will it cost to do what I propose to do? And here you need to realistically consider all costs, including travel, equipment, any incentives for participants, and so on. What resources will I need to conduct my research? such as hardware, software, data analysts, statisticians, or other personnel. So what you want to do here generally is strike a balance between the idea you have and the feasibility of researching it. Once you have an idea and some thoughts on how to carry out your research, pay a visit to your sponsored programs office. Grant applications must be submitted through that office, not by the individual applicant. And your SPO can also help you identify funding agencies and organizations which will support the type of research that you want to do. Once you've found these agencies and organizations, read their application requirements very carefully. The organization's website will generally provide important details such as deadlines and formats, or they may even have templates for you to download. You may need to provide a letter of intent to apply for a grant, and once the agency has received the letter, they may send you an application. Take this letter of intent very seriously as well, since it may determine whether or not you even get an application. The main goal here is to convince the funding agency that you are a credible researcher and that your proposed research is worth supporting. So think of the letter of intent like a mini grant application. Alright, so let's suppose you did get the application. Now it's time to plan your work and work your plan. We'll think about what needs to be in place to help you get funded. You may be a rising star in your organization, but that's not going to mean anything to the people reviewing your grant application. They want to know what you propose to do and why it's significant. You can best address those concerns by providing a big picture overview and establishing yourself as a competent investigator with adequate training and experience who has access to the facilities and resources needed to carry out the research. If you're a first-time applicant, partner with a mentor or a more senior investigator who has successfully applied for research funding in the past. If you do partner with a mentor or investigator, you'll need to describe your mentorship team and your collaborators in your application so the reviewers will feel you have enough expertise. This is especially helpful if you are applying for your first grant. You'll also need to describe equipment, space, and other resources you will use for your research, but none of that's going to matter very much without an interesting research question. The most exciting research questions are simple and elegant, making others wonder why no one has thought of this before. Reviewers don't have a lot of time, so if your research question is too complex, the reviewer is less likely to read the entire application. Bear in mind that first-time applicants have grants that are smaller and funded over fewer years. However, it can take many years to answer a research question, so this is another reason why it's important to choose a research question that interests you. Therefore, write your research question in a fundamental way that challenges the status quo. As I mentioned back in the first week, the most obvious solution to a problem isn't always the only way, and it isn't always the best way. For example, researchers have known for years that certain types of depression are genetic. Finally, a research team came along and asked, where exactly in the genetic profile can we find the anomalies associated with inherited depression? By identifying 15 distinct single nucleotide polymorphisms in the genome, these scientists have made it possible to develop more targeted therapies which will eventually provide more effective treatments for the disease. It's conceivable that someday scientists will be able to stop depression before it starts. Other strategies for an interesting research question may be to look at why a randomized controlled trial did not lead to expected results. Randomized controlled trials are the gold standard of scientific research, but frequently these trials have poor design, inadequate outcomes, and very little follow-up. You've probably heard of medications that were approved by the FDA after what appeared to be successful clinical trials, and yet those medications were taken off the market because of side effects. You may be able to propose a better design for identifying those side effects. You can also look for other means of researching a topic, such as a population that has been understudied in previous research literature, or a clinical observation that has not been tested empirically. However you pose your question, you need to show that it is relevant to the funding agency's mission. Suppose you're applying for a grant from the National Institutes for Child Health and Human Development. Returning to our diabetes example, a researcher proposing to study the effects of exercise versus drug therapy in a previously underrepresented population would have a better chance of getting funded because the proposal is aligned with the agency's mission to improve child health. So to sum up, the question is important to you. Why should it be important to the readers? Has this ever been done before? Was it done properly? What were the limitations of previous studies, and how can you overcome them? How can you convince the readers you can do it? Who else is on your team? How credible are they, and what can they contribute? Next, you'll need to develop the question and hypothesis into a narrative. As I stated before, doing this well means you will need to bridge the gap between your perspective and your readers' perspectives. It also means writing to your readers, not down to them. At least one reader will not be an expert in your scientific area, but that doesn't make him or her an idiot. It does mean you need to write clearly, be specific, and tell an interesting story. There's no shortcut. It takes time, practice, revising, and proofreading, and proofreading, and proofreading again. But your reviews, which are also called your chances for funding, will be stronger if your writing is easier to read. Ensure there's a logical flow of ideas. Each point you make should follow from the previous one, and the reader should be able to see the connections. Keep it simple. Every point you make should be directly linkable to your hypothesis. Maybe you could easily accomplish 2 or 3 side projects along with your primary research, but the reviewers won't see it that way. Remain focused. The narrative will begin with your specific aims. In the segment on scientific reports, I mentioned that your report should answer 4 questions for the reader. Why did you start? What did you do? What did you find? And what does it mean? So think of your specific aims as answering the question, why are you starting? Most grant proposals will have 1 or 2 specific aims. Too many suggests a lack of focus, and these aims will address the way you plan to answer your research question, so you will define a specific goal. What hypothesis are you testing? The expected outcome or outcomes, and the impact the outcome will have on the research field. After you've explained why you're starting your specific aims, it's time to turn to the next question. What are you going to do? You should also review why you're going to do it this way. Now, this isn't the point at which you prepare a 500-page treatise on previous shortcomings. This section's length will also be limited. Read the application instructions to find out exactly how much room you have to explain. You'll want to address these 3 main criteria: significance, innovation, and approach. Significance means you'll provide a big picture overview of the field and why this research is important. You can summarize pertinent literature on the topic and provide a rationale for what you propose to do. Innovation. Describe any new theoretical approaches, methods, or other aspects of your research that make it unique. Now, bear in mind there's a difference between innovation and off the wall. There should be a clear continuity between what's being done and what you're planning to do. Approach. Explain how you will accomplish the specific aims. How will you collect data? How will you analyze data? What are the potential problems and how will you handle them? What are your benchmarks for success? Are any precautions necessary, and how will you or your team take them? Think about this quote for a moment. The budget is often left to complete last, and yet it is quite literally the backbone of all projects. A poorly completed budget will kill a project. if not in review, then in implementation. Basically, this means that you don't want to ask for too little money, because if you're underfunded, you may be scrambling to find a way to fulfill the commitments you made in the research proposal. The reviewers are not going to be impressed by bargain basement proposals. If your proposed budget is too high or too low, the reviewers will be suspicious of the research project's feasibility. Don't be afraid to ask for advice on this from your mentors, your research partners, or even your sponsored programs office. Also, resist the temptation to pad the budget. Senior reviewers are going to have enough experience to know how long a study should take and how much it should cost. Bear in mind, too, that you can use the funds you receive only for the project identified in the proposal. When developing your budget, you'll not only need to identify expenses, but also have a justification for those expenses. For instance, the principal investigator usually commits about 20% of his or her total time to a project. Thus, 20% of his or her total salary can be requested. The project manager will commit about 30%. Other individuals' commitments may vary. For instance, data analysts and statisticians may function as consultants. On the other hand, an administrative or business manager who keeps track of expenses and lab technicians may devote 100% effort. You'll also need to think about how much travel you will need and also how much you'll have to spend on purchasing and maintaining equipment, supplies, etc. For scientific research, many agencies require NIH biosketches or CVs, which emphasize publications, previous research projects, scientific training, previous funding levels and sources, and other information demonstrating their credibility. For established scientists with 20 years or more experience, the list of publications and research projects can run into dozens of pages, so it's unlikely that even the most dedicated reviewers will comb through all that information. It's best to stick to the past 5 years, unless, as you would with a resume, you want to highlight some previous experience, publication, or project that is especially relevant to your current application. Your principal investigator, as well as any mentors and collaborators, and of course you, should prepare written letters dated within 2 months of the application deadline. These letters do not need to be lengthy and cover every aspect of expertise. Instead, they should be concise statements assuring the reviewers that the staff, facilities, and resources needed to conduct the research are available. You can also include letters from esteemed colleagues and established scientists who endorse your proposal and affirm your project is worthwhile. How do you know when you're ready to submit? Well, obviously the application deadline is one big factor, since late or incomplete applications are not considered. Apart from that, here's a checklist you can use as a general guide. The main considerations are a clear, interesting research question, consistent with the funding agency's mission, with a clearly presented and feasible way to find an answer. To recap, here are a few do's and don'ts. You need to plan ahead. Build your case, which means demonstrating that you are an expert in the field. Remember, reviewers don't know who you are or what you can do. And a good way to build your case is to review the literature and publish it before you apply for a grant. Preliminary data will vastly increase your chances of funding. Get a team in place to pull it off. You need to explain who you are hiring and what expertise they have. You will most likely need a mentorship team, especially if you're a young investigator without previous funding. Prove you can pull it off, which means establishing your credibility. Explain how you can overcome limitations of previous efforts, how you will manage data sets, whether you have statistical support, and what is available to you in terms of infrastructure and resources. A quick note about statistical support. You will need an experienced statistician. Don't underestimate the importance of this. One of the most fundamental reasons why projects don't get funded is because of poor experimental design. A statistician can work wonders in that regard. Find out where to apply. On the last slide, I will provide a link for an extensive list of funding sources maintained by the Albert Einstein College of Medicine's Office of Grant Support. This list includes both federal and private funding organizations. Once you identify an agency or organization, be sure to read their application instructions carefully, including formats, deadlines, letters of intent, and other requirements. Contact your sponsored programs office. Now, there are variations on this name. It may be called Office of Sponsored Research or something similar. These individuals work with grant applications all day, every day, and they are valuable resources for getting your application submitted. And finally, the don'ts. Don't overgeneralize. Hypothesis-driven research questions are viewed more favorably. Don't try to do too much. Sub-projects distract your reviewers, who will view them as unrealistic, and writing about them takes away valuable space from your real specific aims. Don't exaggerate your research's potential. Maybe your results will win you the next Nobel Prize in whatever, but unless you have preliminary data backing up your claims, don't make them. Above all, don't take it personally if your application is not funded. If you receive an explanation, read it carefully and keep an open mind. Pay special attention to the comments from the review committee's scientific officer. These are usually the most important since they tend to summarize the committee's discussion. You can ask your mentor about the comments as well. She or he will probably have served on review panels before and may be able to provide insight into what you need to do differently. If you decide to write to the committee to appeal or rebut the decision, make sure you address each and every concern raised. Keep detailed responses directed at the principal problems the committee identified. If you disagree with any particular point, then support your position with strong arguments and evidence. It would be best to acknowledge points of the review you agree with, since that establishes your ability to accept constructive criticism. Definitely be polite. This is not an appropriate venue to criticize the reviewer's knowledge and expertise or to express anger. Bear in mind, too, that a grant which receives a lower score one year may very well score higher the next, even without changes. A great deal depends on how much funding is available and how many other applications the agency has received.